Hey everyone, welcome back to Here in Apologetics. Super pumped to join us today to have Dr. Michael Huemer. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He's talked about literally so many different things from political philosophy to veganism to things like the mind and the soul and epistemology and all this stuff. So today we're going to talk about reincarnation and the mind and whatnot. So Mike, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I guess I'm a little scared because I didn't use your full title of Galactic Emperor, seeking all of those Philosopher King powers against me or something, but
Yes.
we'll make it work.
Yeah, don't worry. I won't execute you.
Appreciate it. Good start to the interview. Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit, Mike, about who you are and what you do and things like that?
I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I've written 70 articles or something like that. And I don't know, a bunch of books. I've lost count now. But anyway, I've written about epistemology, political philosophy, ethics, metaethics, and a small amount of metaphysics.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool, Mike. What's it like over in Boulder? I have a lot of family that lives in Longmont, just north of you, and I've been to Boulder a gazillion times. What's the Boulder life like right now? I'm just curious because I'm oh, you're over there.
It's a good town if you like hiking. It's a great place. I'm in Denver, which is bigger, so we like it better because it's a very nice, friendly, big city. And right now it's kind of cold. So I don't know where you are.
I'm in Virginia, so it's cold, not as bad as you, but So besides we're talking about the geography of Colorado and Virginia today, we're going to talk about your paper on souls and the reincarnation. So what got your mind thinking about this topic, Mike? Because obviously you've written in a bunch of different areas, especially in political philosophy and epistemology. So what got you thinking about writing about the soul and reincarnation?
Yeah, so I thought about nature of consciousness for a long time, right? And when I first started studying philosophy, I was hoping that I would find out why consciousness exists, but I never did find out because nobody else knew. But anyway, what made me think about the reincarnation argument, it was actually prompted by reading a book by Leonard Susskind called The Cosmic Landscape, in which he tries to make it plausible that there's a multiverse, right? And so there's maybe there's an infinite number of parallel universes, and then if that's true, then there are other universes in which there are people who look just like you, right, who are as similar to you as you like, right? And so I started thinking about that, and then I started thinking, I wonder why I'm not experiencing those people's lives, right? And sort of wondered if this was evidence against the multiverse theory. So, okay, but then I realized that, in order to have multiple copies of you, you don't need a multiverse. You just need infinite time. So there could be multiple copies of you, over time, even if there isn't a multiverse. And, given that time is infinite, at some time in the future, everything that has a non-zero probability will happen again. So at some time in the future, there will be another copy of you, right? And so then I kind of started thinking if the other person who is very similar to me in the future will literally be me, right? And then, I thought about it. There's there's a surprisingly good argument that it will be
you. So in your view, Mike, is this something when we're thinking about the souls and reincarnation, is this something that you're oh, this is definitely going to happen? Or you're it's just a fun idea? Is it somewhere in the middle? Where are you with regards to your thoughts on this topic?
So
how confident
know.
Are you?
I don't know what the probability is. I would say I have an outright belief. So I could be wrong. The main way I could think of that I could be wrong is, maybe the past is actually finite, and it is a premise of the argument that the past is infinite. That's the only thing that I think, that is a likely place where the argument goes wrong.
Okay. Well, that's super cool. And let's dive into this, Mike. So the first thing we want to talk about is like the idea of like what is the soul. So if I'm asking you like, Mike, is the soul? What is the soul? What are you talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, so like the way this is typically used in Western philosophy is okay. So there are mental states and there are physical states, and the soul is the thing that has the mental states, understood as a non-physical component of the person, right? So there's a non-physical component of a person, which is the subject, the thing that has mental states and mental properties and stuff like that. And it also has the role that it determines personal identity. So if you believe in a soul, so
Mm-hmm.
if your soul goes into another body, then that becomes you, right? Like um, an organism that has your soul as you automatically.
Mm-hmm. So a soul is kind of like it's like who you are is kind of like what you're getting out.
Yeah, I mean, so and like I don't know, this is my view, and I think this is a common view in Western philosophy, right? Like what you are really essentially is a soul,
Mm-hmm.
like a non-material object that is the subject of mental states. Like
Mm-hmm.
there, so you have thoughts, feelings, desires, and so on, but there can't be a thought without a thing that is thinking the thought.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you might think, oh, well, maybe like your brain is thinking the thought, or maybe just the human organism is thinking the thought, right? Which is what physicalists would say. So then they would deny that there's a soul. Okay, but
Mm-hmm.
there are pretty good arguments against physicalism, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm. So I wonder then like with your view, like how does the soul relate to consciousness? Like is the soul just like our conscious experience, or like is it a part of our consciousness? Like how does it relate, like when we're talking about the soul, to like our conscious existence? You reference like physicalism, and I think that's gonna kind of fall short.
yeah, I mean, consciousness is a property of the soul. Um, Although you could be unconscious, so it's not an essential property of the soul. But so like consciousness is it's often described by philosophers as the fact that you're conscious means there's something that it's like to be you.
Mm-hmm.
So there are qualitative characteristics of your experience. These are the sort of characteristics that you can't really explain to somebody else unless they've had the same kind of experience. All right. So anyway, so there's that. There's the qualitative feel of experiences, and the soul is the thing that has those properties. It's the thing that has the mental properties, the thing that has the experiences, and so on. So yeah, right. So okay, but so in my paper that you read, I claim that you can exist while not conscious, right? So now
Mm-hmm.
this is trivial if you think about like going to sleep, you're asleep and not dreaming, and almost everyone agrees that you still exist when you're asleep. And including the people who believe in souls, they think that your soul still exists when you're asleep and not dreaming, right? And so, but I claim also that you could still exist after you're dead. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just like being asleep, like
Yeah.
sleep for perhaps a long time, and also having amnesia, right? That's what
Mm-hmm.
death is.
Yeah. So it's like in your view, we have the soul, like it's this thing that has properties, and amongst these properties is consciousness, and that's kind of like how we can like exist and like be conscious. But then like death doesn't kill the soul in your view. It's kind of like the soul keeps going, and like maybe it like goes to sleep for a little bit, but the soul doesn't just go away as soon as like the organism of your body dies.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, my claim, and like I had an earlier paper that argues this. People will be reincarnated. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly strong argument that you're going to be reincarnated infinitely many times. Unfortunately, and also you were incarnated infinitely many times in the past. Presumably, you don't remember any of these.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that, memories are stored in your brain, which gets destroyed every time you die. Okay, so, so like dying is like getting amnesia and being unconscious until your next lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But the soul is eternal. It was never created and it's never destroyed.
Okay. Well, let's keep going into some of this. why think we have a soul, Mike? So before we get into like the reasons for the reincarnation, like why think that like we would have a soul in the first place?
Um, I mean, so there are characteristics that people have that are interesting and that don't appear to be physical, right? Okay, so, mental states have the property of intentionality, which is the property of representing something or being of or about something. So when
Hmm.
you have a thought, the thought is a thought of something. Okay, and it's just like really hard to see how purely physical states, like there's just like a bunch of chemicals. It's hard to see how like a pile of chemicals can be about something, right? Or
Hmm.
representing something. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that, one interesting characteristic. And then another interesting characteristic of people is we have qualia, which, as I say, is like the qualitative characteristics of experience, the fact that there's something that it's like to have a particular experience. Okay. Now, in contrast, there's nothing that it's like to be a rock. Rocks have properties, but there isn't anything that it's like to have that, to have, whatever, 5 pounds mass or something like that. There's
Hmm.
nothing that it's like to have a purely physical property. Okay. And then another interesting thing about people is we have free will. And it's hard to understand that in terms of like purely physical things going on in your body. So if you're just a physical and chemical mechanism, then it's hard to see how you could have something like free will. It's hard to see
Hmm.
how, any of your actions are not either predetermined or just random.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful, Mike, because you're trying to like press at like we have all these like these really good like ideas of like what the physical is. Like it's like this like stuff that like you can see clearly, whereas mental states are kind of different than that. Like they have this about like quality. Like you could think about like a physical object, which like molecules, like a molecule in itself, like how does it get that like aboutness from it if we're just like our minds are like the product of molecules and whatnot. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and by the way, like think about the physical properties that chemicals and atoms have. Like they have locations in space and time, and they have sizes and shapes and whatever and masses. Um, but your mind doesn't seem to have those properties. And like when you have a thought, your thought doesn't seem to have a size or a shape or a determinate location in space, right? And
Hmm.
so just like the characteristics of physical things and mental things, just on the face of it, look very different.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's super helpful, Mike. So we talked a little bit about like what kind of beings that we are. Like you're gonna say that we're souls. We're not having like some physicalist picture of the reality. So I'd love to like kind of start to dive in a little bit to this argument. So your argument relies first off that like that we aren't like merely physical beings. Is that right? Like physical, if physicalism is true, your argument's in trouble.
I mean, my like the belief that we have a soul just contradicts physicalism. I mean,
Yeah.
so, I mean, but I would say like I wouldn't exactly say that my argument's in trouble. I would just say I have an argument against physicalism. So if
Okay.
physicalism is true, then I'm wrong somehow. I don't know how.
Hmm. Yeah, I got you. Okay, so then the next thing you talked about is that your argument relies on like an infinite universe. So first off, Mike, like why think the universe is infinite in the past?
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes you hear people say stuff about how like time was created, right? Sometimes people say, God created time. Maybe God is outside time and then he created time.
Hmm.
And I think that this is just a confused thought, right? Because, think about what it means to create time, or think about what it means to create something, anything, right?
Hmm.
Like, okay, I made a cake. And what does that mean?
Hmm.
Well, it means, okay, first there was no cake, and then I performed some action which caused a cake to exist. All
Hmm.
right. So that means there was a time when there wasn't a cake, there was an action that I performed, and then there was a time when there was a cake. Right. Now, if I was going to create time, what I'd have to have is I'd have to start with a time when there's no time, and then I'd have to perform an action which would cause time to exist at a later time. And that's all incoherent. There can't
Hmm.
be a time when there's no time. And also, if you were outside time, you couldn't perform any actions because actions occur at times, and you couldn't cause anything because there's a temporal relation between cause and effect. right? So if there wasn't time, nothing could create time, right? Okay, now if you accept that, then you should realize that it's not only that God couldn't create time, like nothing could cause time, right? And so, okay, now you might think, okay, but maybe time has a beginning anyway, just nothing caused it. Time just begins at a certain time, for no reason. Okay, but when you try to imagine time beginning, like it's hard to not imagine, time coming into existence. So you think of it as time is going to start, and when you imagine that, you're imagining something incoherent, right? That's a confused thought, because
Mhm.
like you're imagining the time when there's no time followed by the time when there's time, right? Like, okay, so all right, there are arguments that people have for why there should be a beginning of time, and I just don't think any of them are any good, right? So like, I could talk about that a little bit if you want.
Yeah.
Mm.
So what you're trying to think about is like when you're saying that like the universe is infinite, you're kind of saying like the idea of there just being no time is almost like maybe incoherent, because if there was no time, then there wouldn't be like actions or anything like that, and there just would be nothing. But since there is something, like there is like time, am I tracking with you at all?
Yeah, I mean, well, so yeah, obviously there is time now, right?
Yeah.
But some people imagine that time began at a certain point, and then I just want to point out that, well, nothing could explain that, right? Nothing
Hmm.
could possibly explain time beginning, because anything that was going to cause time to begin would have to be in time, right?
Hmm.
And then so that would mean that there would have to be time when there was no time, right? But so like the Orthodox, at least for some time, the Orthodox view in cosmology was, this particular version of the Big Bang theory that says, time, literally space and time began 14 billion years ago. It was
Hmm.
like the moment of the Big Bang. That was like the first thing that ever happened.
Yeah.
And there was nothing before that, and there's no explanation for that. And there can't be an explanation for that, right? Because that was the beginning.
Hmm.
Okay. But anyway, and I just think that this is a super implausible theory. Right? Like there were just a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of mass energy in a tiny region moving outward, and that was the first thing that ever happened for no reason. Right?
Hmm.
I just think that's super implausible.
Yeah. No, that would be weird to think that like there's just like this matter and energy is just there and it's just moving in from this like really tiny region for no reason at all. Like that would be implausible. Okay. So I'm just trying to fully understand like why you think the universe is infinite. And you're pointing out like all these problems with like a finite universe and understanding. Is that kind of like the move you're making to show that it's infinite? Is showing that like if the universe is finite, we have a lot of different problems to wrestle with.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that like most of the time when people think that, um, when people try to imagine a beginning of time, they're having incoherent thoughts, right?
Hmm.
Like when they say, well, God created time, maybe he started time 14 billion years ago. That's incoherence. Okay, now the idea of a beginning of time is not itself actually a contradiction. It's
Hmm.
just that like when you start thinking about it, the way that you imagine it is like it's um, it's really hard to avoid having the incoherent thoughts. Okay, it's sort of like the idea of an edge of space. So that like the idea of finite space where like you could come to the limit of space and there's no space beyond that, that is not a formal contradiction, but it does seem impossible. Like when
Hmm.
you try to imagine like the edge of space is here, it seems like you could ask, okay, but like what's over here, and then past this point, which is said to be the last point. And it seems like there just would be something, there would be an answer to what was past that point, even if the answer was that it was completely empty, there was nothing there, right? Okay, but that would just show that wasn't the edge of space, right? And so like it's not a formal contradiction, because you can describe a mathematical structure, like you could describe a sphere. That's a consistent mathematical structure that has an edge or whatever, it has a limit. Okay, so All right. So like, it's not a formal contradiction to say that space has the structure of a sphere. But when you try to imagine it, just seems like it's impossible, right? And so like, similarly, it's not a formal contradiction to say, time began 14 billion years ago. But it's just that when you try to imagine that happening, it just seems like that couldn't be. It's like, it seems like there would be an answer to, and what happened before that? Like, and what was God doing before he created time, or right, or whatever was supposed to have created time? It just seems like you could ask, and what before that?
Mm-hmm. It's like you're kind of thinking like there is like it's almost like there's time before, like there's apparently no time because you're asking like what's there before that. Like sure, like if you want to say that like God created time, you're like, well, like how is God creating if there's no time? Like is he just like there? Like what does that even mean? You're kind of like that's the move that's happening here.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so how do people respond then to that, Mike? You hinted at that, like how do people like push back and say like maybe like you're wrong, like you might be the Galactic Emperor, but time is in fact finite. Like how are people going to push back on that?
I mean, some people say the past can't be infinite because there can't be an actual infinity, or there can't be a completed infinity, right? And so, and if there wasn't a beginning of time, then the past would be a completed actual infinity. Okay. And then you're like, oh, well, why can't there be a completed actual infinity? And then, you're like, people give examples of these paradoxes that result from imagining some infinite process being completed. Okay. But, I think there can be an actual completed infinity, right? And I think that this is shown every time an object moves from one point to another. Because, per Zeno's paradox, every time you move from point A to point B, you complete an infinite series. You go the first half of the distance, and then you go the next quarter of the distance, and then you go the next eighth of the distance, and etc. And this is an infinite series, but it gets completed every time something moves. So you can complete an infinite series.
That's interesting, and that's like a thought that like I've never materialized, but like I thought about that like when thinking about like actual infinities. Like there is like if you think about like even like this like little pen I have here, like there is an infinite like measurement distance almost because like you could measure it as like 1 inch. But from point A to point B, as you said, there's an actually like infinite number of like little points you can measure. Like you can never run out of like little like micro inches or whatever that word would be to measure how like big the pen is, which is interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I find that interesting. So what do you think about like the science then? Like people who say like, well, Mike, we got this like cool science over here that's showing us that like space and time have a beginning.
Yeah. So, like, so I mean, first I should say, not all cosmologists endorse the beginning of time theory, right? Some people have cyclical models of the universe where it goes
Mm-hmm.
through just a cycle over and over again. Okay, so Roger Penrose is one of these people, the mathematician and occasionally cosmologist. So according to Penrose, so he's done like calculations to figure out what the probability is of the universe starting in the state that we think it was in at the time of the Big Bang. So to speak, if you were to imagine picking a starting state of a universe at random, right? And because like there's no explanation of why the starting state should be what it is. If indeed there was a beginning, there couldn't be any explanation of why it was in that state at the beginning. Okay, so anyway, so if you just pick some random starting state, the probability of it being the one that we think the universe was in at the time of the Big Bang is about 1 over 10 to the 10 to the 124 power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is a very small number. This is extremely improbable. And it seems to me like unsatisfactory to have a theory where you say that just like for no reason, this thing with a probability of 1 over 10 to the 10 to the 124 happened. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
No explanation. Okay. And if you think that that's a good theory, I have a better theory, which is maybe the universe began in the year 1950, because that could happen. That, like if you're into stuff beginning at some time for no reason and just having a certain state for no reason at that time, why not just have the universe begin in 1950 in the state that it was actually in at that time? like that's just as plausible as the Big Bang, starting in that state 14 billion years ago. And by the way, actually, the 1950 theory is more probable than the Big Bang theory. Right? It's more probable because the state the universe was in 1950 is more probable than the state that it was in in 14 billion BC. And the way that I know that is the entropy law, right? Entropy has been increasing since the time of the Big Bang. It's increased a lot, and higher entropy states are more probable states, right? That kind of is what entropy means, right? The fact that you're in a higher entropy state means that you're in an intrinsically more probable state. Okay, so the 1950 theory is intrinsically more probable than the Big Bang theory, right? And now, by the way, just to clarify, because I have had a student misunderstand this, I am not saying the universe began in 1950. That is not my view, right? You're supposed to think that, the 1950 theory is absurd, but it's more probable than the Big Bang theory. So the Big Bang theory is absurd.
Yeah, that's interesting to get your mind around. So why not say why say compared to your view, or not your, but saying that someone says well, the universe just began at the Big Bang, or the universe began at 1950. Are these ideas in your mind more probable than maybe someone that says oh, it's just a quantum field caused the Big Bang, there's our story, or God caused the Big Bang, there's our story? Are those views of something causing the Big Bang, are they less probable in your view, or are they incoherent because of the time thing that you're going to get back at? Yeah, just curious your thoughts there.
Well, I mean, something could have caused the Big Bang, but in my view, there's always something before that. So, right. So, there are cyclical models of the universe where, in one version, there's a big crunch, the universe collapses and then it explodes again, whatever. And Penrose has a, weird version where, okay, the universe goes to thermal equilibrium and everything turns into radiation. And then somehow at the last moment when everything is just radiation, it then turns into another Big Bang. Right? It doesn't collapse. It just immediately just is another Big Bang. Anyway, so I'm not objecting to something caused the Big Bang. I'm not objecting to the Big Bang having happened. I'm objecting to the idea that it happened for no reason.
Okay.
That it was just like that at the beginning and there was nothing before that. There's always something before, and it just goes back forever.
Why think then that the universe being infinite is more probable than there being maybe something necessary God or quantum field causing maybe that state, and that's what explains everything? Is it going back to I'm just trying to understand that. Is it going back to the time thing? Where are you going with that?
I mean, what if God created the universe in 14 billion BC? Okay. But per what I've been saying previously, assume that time is nevertheless infinite. So what was God doing before he created the universe? Was he sitting around? He was just sitting around doing nothing for an infinite amount of time? Why would he do that? And by the way, if that was true, then why would he suddenly create a universe? After sitting around for infinity years with no universe, why does he suddenly make a universe in 14 billion BC? Right? Because nothing has changed, right? Because it's infinite time and there's no universe and there's only God. So there's no reason for him to do that at that time.
Yeah.
Right? So the only thing that makes sense is that it's eternal. The universe is eternal. It just goes back forever.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. So we talked about, anything else you want to say, Mike, with regards to the point on the universe being infinite before we get into recurrence and whatnot?
I'm sorry. Say again.
Is there anything else you want to say on the universe being infinite or forever hold your peace?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess, it's also important that the future is infinite, but nobody really disagrees about that. Some people think the past has a beginning, but almost no one thinks that the future has an end. So, yeah.
Interesting. It would be simpler to say, I think, almost that if the past is, or if the future is infinite, it would make sense that the past is also infinite. It seems to me there would be some sort of simplicity point you could make there when thinking about it.
Yeah. And, you might think why would you believe in an infinite future but not an infinite past, right? But I guess there's a philosophical argument, which is the infinite past is a completed infinity, and the infinite future isn't a completed infinity, right? It's never completed. There's always more future. So.
Okay. Well, So let's get into this. Let's say like we are these souls that aren't going to be like destroyed like the physical death of our body. The past is infinite. Like there isn't some beginning to the time. It's just been going infinite into the past. How is this going to lead to recurrence? Like what does it mean for the infinite past to lead to recurrence? And like how is this the case?
So like a number of people have thought that there's some kind of eternal recurrence, right? So Nietzsche got famous for this, for introducing the idea, but it goes back at least to Seneca in ancient Rome. So like a lot of people thought the universe goes through cycles and everything that happens again. Okay, now probably the reason why philosophers have thought this might have involved a fallacy. So
Yeah. All good.
apparently Nietzsche and other people thought that the universe was going to exactly repeat the exact state that it's in now would occur again. And after that, everything that happens after now would also repeat exactly, right? Okay, but that is not guaranteed because the fallacy that the philosophers were probably making was thinking that there's only finitely many possible states for the world to be in, but there aren't. There's infinitely many possible states. So there being infinitely many possible states means that the world can just continue forever without ever exactly repeating the same state. However, it does have to come close, right? So, like think about like a region of space and think about moving through this region of space at some speed forever. You can move through a finite region of space forever without intersecting your own path again. However, you do have to come close to hitting your own path, right? You have to come arbitrarily close to your starting point if you continue moving around forever. Okay. So, all right. So there's basically a theorem to that effect. It does assume that that the universe is confined to a limited region. So if the universe expands outward forever, then it will never repeat and it will never come close to repeating. Okay. But assuming that it doesn't expand outward forever, and like there's some limited spatial region that the world stays within, it has to come close to repeating. All right, so it has to approximately repeat. So at some time in the future, there'll be two people doing a podcast who will look like you and me, right? They will not be in exactly the state we're in, but they'll be in like really close state, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so my thought is, at some time in the future, when there's a person who's sufficiently similar to me, that will actually literally count as another copy of me. Right. So like, I don't know what the requirements are for a person to count as me.
Yeah.
But whatever they are, it's either a zero probability event or a non-zero probability event. Okay. If it's a zero probability event, then I shouldn't be here, but I am here. So if it's a non-zero probability event, then it's guaranteed to occur again, given infinite time. Right? Everything that has a non-zero probability occurs eventually given infinite time.
So does that mean like there's an infinite amount of like Mike? So there's definitely like a future Mike Huemer walking around somewhere. But like given an infinite amount of time, could there be like an infinite amount of Mike Huemers running around in the future?
Yeah. So like the next Mike Huemer who shows up, he could give the same argument that there's going to be another one after him. And it just goes on like that forever, right? And by the way, it also goes that way into the past forever.
There's an infinite chain of Mike Huemers telling everyone that this is the way, and apparently no one else is buying on, and that's just the cycle of the universe forever and ever and ever.
Maybe different things happen in different lifetimes. Like maybe sometimes I don't discover the argument, right? Then other times maybe you discover the argument and whatever.
So what we're thinking about then with recurrence is like you're like, for simplicity's sake, just thinking about the future. Like given an infinite past, there's going to be an infinite future. So there's an infinite amount of time for stuff to happen, and like maybe the universe just keeps expanding, then it contracts and it keeps going. And like if there's a non-zero probability of something happening, then it's going to happen. Like if there's a non-zero probability of like me existing again, then it's going to happen. And given that the future is infinite, like there's not just like it happens once and the universe like closes up shop and shuts down. It's going to keep happening. And it's going to actually happen an infinite amount of times. So there's an infinite period of time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, like, so, apparently Nietzsche assumed that so he thought there was going to be an eternal recurrence, and he assumed that the future copies of you will literally be the same person. But this is not obvious. So you might think, well, why not think that the future things that look just like me will just be copies of me, but not actually me? They'll just be people who look like me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like how if you have an identical twin, there are identical twins and they're not the same people, right? Different
Yeah.
people. Okay, so like maybe the future me will be like the identical twin of me, but it won't literally be me. Right? Okay, and now I think Nietzsche's answer to this maybe was that actually no, time is circular. So the future copy of you actually is not a distinct token,
Mm-hmm.
and because the future time at which the future you exists is not actually a different time; it's the same time. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, but anyway, now I think this is metaphysically impossible. All right,
Mm-hmm.
but be that as it may, like that could be why he didn't think he needed an argument that the future copies of you will literally be you. Right. Okay, but um, this is undermined by the fact that there's no exact recurrence. There's only an approximate recurrence, right? And so there's a continuous infinity of possible states for a physical system to be in, right? Like you could even have just like even the simplest physical system, like two particles, there's a continuous infinity of states because there's a distance between them and the distance is a real number. And so there's a continuous infinity of possible values, right? So, right. So like that's why the universe should not be expected to ever exactly repeat a state. And that prevents you from saying that it's literally the same time, right? And so that prevents you from saying time is circular. So actually it's linear, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then you do need the argument that the future things that look like you are literally going to be you, right? But okay,
Yeah.
but the argument there is, well, if the conditions for something to count as me are so demanding that they have a probability 0, right? Like if you have to hit a specific point um, in the state space, which has probability 0, then I shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I know for certain that I am here, right? So that disconfirms any theory which implies that the probability of me being here would be 0. Like any
Yeah.
theory that implies that I know is false with 100% certainty.
Okay. I think I'm tracking with you. So we have this recurrence, where like the past is in the past and the future. It's going to keep happening, and we're going to keep like coming into existence because there's a non-zero probability. So how is this then going to like lead us into this like reincarnation idea that you've been talking about, Mike?
Oh, I mean, so the idea about there being another copy of a person who looks just like me is one possible account of how reincarnation occurs, right? Like maybe, like I don't know what the right theory of personal identity is, okay? But
Mm-hmm.
maybe what's essential to your identity is a particular brain configuration, right? And so like at some future time that brain configuration will recur. And so then you will exist again, right? Sometime long after the death of the current body, right? Okay, but I don't know. There could be other theories, right? So maybe it's just like maybe your soul just leaves your body when you die, and then maybe God just decides to put your soul into another body.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, right? Okay, so like I'm not saying that when you're reincarnated, it's definitely going to be another person who looks a lot like you, right? Like
Yeah.
for all I know, you could be reincarnated in a completely different body. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe sometime you'll be reincarnated as a cat, and just I don't have any way of ruling that out.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. So how is like I'm trying to think about how this is working, Mike. So we have like our soul, which you say is like immaterial, and like trying to think about how it might come together with like another body in the future. Like, is it like how's this working? Because like the only picture I have in my mind, which I'm sure wouldn't be the case, is like your soul's kind of just like immaterially just like floating around, and then it just like bumps into a body. It's like, oh wait, sweet, here we go. I got a body again. Here we go. Let's do it all over again. Like, how is this working where the souls and the bodies are like coming together?
Oh yeah.
With a reoccur.
Yeah, so I don't know, and nobody else does either, right? So, I mean, presumably there's some kind of there are laws of nature that describe causal relationships between things. We know a lot of the laws of nature. We know a bunch of laws that relate physical things to other physical things. But also, there are some psychophysical laws which we have not discovered. We know that they must exist because we know that the mind affects the body and vice versa. So there must be some
Hmm.
laws describing the causal relations, but we don't actually know what the laws are. Okay. So
Hmm.
anyway, so like I would have to like be an amazing, scientist, and like we would have to have the psychophysical
Hmm.
science that we don't have to actually explain the conditions in which um, a body gets connected to a soul, and thereby, a conscious person is created. Right. But
Hmm.
anyway, like, so, all I could say is, well, some physical stuff happens that causes things to happen in a mind, right?
Yeah. So we're looking at these psychophysical laws and saying there's something here. We just don't really know it because we don't have the science to get there yet. But there's something here that could do the work of like trying to confirm this. So, okay, that's helpful, Mike. So, anything else you want to say about reincarnation? I'd love to get some objections and kind of questions I had as we go. Yeah, anything else about reincarnation first, though?
I don't know. It's an amazing idea. Right. I think this is true. By the way, I think this is like this is part of a broader point, so given that time is infinite, just the universe in general cannot be headed in a specific direction. Rather, given that time is infinite in both directions, it has to be cyclical.
Hmm.
Right? So like if the universe was headed in a certain direction, it would already be there. It would already be the maximum distance in that direction, right? Or for any place it could be, it wouldn't be there. It would be farther along, right?
Okay.
So like for example, if it was actually true that entropy always increases and never decreases, we would be in thermal equilibrium right now. Like we would be in the maximum entropy state because there's been an infinite amount of time. So like we would have reached that given infinite time, and then we would never have deviated. So, okay. So it can't be true that entropy always increases.
Hmm. Okay. So that's helpful, Mike. I'd love to get into some objections now. So one of the things that you talked about is like the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
So like say the universe is like progressing towards some like heat death where the universe just dies. Like how would you like what is this objection? How would you respond to it?
Yeah. So, like you read in the physics books, you read entropy constantly increases. When they will actually say always, they will actually literally have the word always, and they will literally have the word never, like entropy never decreases. Okay. And that is
Yeah.
known to be false, right? Including known by physicists to be false, right? Like,
Hmm.
including the people who say it, they know that it's false, right?
Yeah.
Because when they give the explanation for why the entropy law is true, it's probabilistic,
Okay.
right? So there's a part like, and the argument implies that there's a non-zero, albeit extremely small, probability of entropy spontaneously decreasing,
Hmm.
right? Like, so if there's you put some milk in your coffee, and then like the milk disperses throughout the coffee, and you never see the milk once dispersed gather back together in the center, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so so that's an example of how entropy goes in one way, right? But then when they give the explanation of why this is true, it implies that, well, it's just that it's extremely improbable for the milk to gather together,
Hmm.
right? Because the explanation involves, well, the milk particles and the coffee particles are just like moving around randomly. And basically, the situation where it looks like milk is evenly distributed throughout the coffee, um, that situation corresponds to the overwhelming majority of possible distributions of coffee and milk particles.
Okay.
You randomly distribute coffee and milk particles in the mug, almost all of them have their milk looking like it's evenly distributed. Okay. And
Hmm.
so, and there's just a tiny portion of them that don't. So if the particles are just moving around randomly, it's very improbable within a limited time, like within a human lifetime, that you're going to see the milk gather together in the middle.
Hmm.
But given infinite time, it's certain that it happens, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
actually, yeah. So actually, given infinite time, eventually the universe will be in a lower entropy state, right? And
Hmm.
like, and okay, like as a matter of fact, the number of times the universe transitions from low entropy to high entropy has to be equal to the number of times that it transitions from high to low entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In just sort of like in overall time, in the overall infinite timeline, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's helpful, Mike. Thinking about the idea of like you're saying, like guys, like even if there is this science like right now showing that like the universe is progressing to heat death, we have to like kind of be like, well, we have this like little perspective here. So we have infinite time. Like maybe it will go to like to heat death, but given like this idea of infinite time, well, like it's very likely, maybe not even likely, like a certainty that like things will come back together again, and we'll have something like a universe eventually, given infinite time, because it's not like you run out of time for things to come back together.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, like I don't know if your viewers know what the heat death is supposed to be, right? Like maybe we just say
Mm-hmm.
that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, so the heat death is the maximum possible entropy state, right? Which I believe is a situation in which everything is just radiation spreading through space. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like a bunch of photons, right? And so like
Yeah.
what cosmologists are expecting to happen is eventually like all the stars in the universe burn out, and then eventually they all fall into giant black holes. And then these black holes are just sitting there for a really ridiculously long time, but the black holes very slowly evaporate via Hawking radiation. So black holes let out a very small amount of radiation. And like
Mm-hmm.
eventually the entire mass of all the black holes is turned into radiation. And so
Mm-hmm.
then that's the final state of the universe. We're just going to be like that for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But as I say, we've got infinite time. So if time is infinite, then eventually, like just spontaneously, maybe the radiation gathers together and, and then creates another Big Bang or something. Okay. Now I'm
Yeah.
not saying that is like that's not the most plausible version of how the Big Bang happened, right? Right. Because that's like a super low probability event. Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how the Big Bang happened. It probably wasn't like that. But if there's nothing else, then eventually that would happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful, Mike. So what about the guy that says, "Yo, like Galactic Emperor, dude, physicalism's true, bro. Like, come on, the brain just causes the mind. Don't you know that, like, if you get in a car wreck, like, your mental states change because your brain states change? Doesn't physicalism just like destroy everything here and like waste the past like 47 minutes of our lives? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, is physicalism compatible with reincarnation? Well, it depends on your view of personal identity, right? So you could have a physicalist view that's compatible with reincarnation.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a popular version of physicalism, right?
Hmm.
But maybe a person is what we call a gappy space-time worm, right?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, like physicalists already, like it's already pretty common to say that a person is a space-time worm, right? Which is so to speak, like there's this stuff happening at different locations in time, right? And sort of you draw a line around the spatiotemporal region that your life occupies, and you say that's you, okay? Anyway, but you could also take that plus like the next thing that's going to look like you at some time in the future. You could take like the fusion of those two things, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, and you could say that that's you instead of just the first one, right? And then
Yeah.
actually, you could take the collection of all of them spread throughout time. There's this infinite series of these space-time worms. You could take that collection and say that that's what you are. Okay, so you exist all these different times. Okay, now I'm
Hmm.
not saying that that's like a really plausible theory, but it is like that's if you were really committed to physicalism, that's what you should think. Okay, because I already gave an argument for reincarnation, right? Like I already gave the
Hmm.
argument that reincarnation is 100% likely. Okay,
Yeah.
so like if you have a theory that implies that reincarnation is impossible, then your theory has just been refuted. That's all,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Okay. So this is helpful, Mike, because you're trying to like look at this and you're kind of thinking that, well, here's a thought. So like, couldn't you say like, you're a physicalist, but you also think the universe is infinite, like going in the past and in the future. Could you say like, well, like given like an infinite future, like it's likely or it's certain that like eventually like maybe like your like the atoms or like the DNA would line up perfectly, or like whatever causes the mind in the future and like cause another you to exist, and maybe this time instead of maybe like being reincarnated, it'd be like a clone of you almost. Could you say that if you're a physicalist?
Yeah. So, I mean, like the question would be whether that thing counts as literally you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like, given infinite time, it will definitely happen, right? Given infinite
Yeah.
time, there will definitely be another person with my genetic code. Okay, now, maybe being me requires more than just having my genetic code, all right? But whatever else you want to add in, that's also going to happen. My genetic code plus like a particular brain configuration at the time of birth or whatever you want to add in, that will also happen eventually given infinite time. So, okay. All right, but so, and then, you just have like some theory about what makes something count as you. And the
Mm-hmm.
theory either makes the occurrence of you a zero probability event or a non-zero probability event, right? Like those are
Mm-hmm.
the only two possibilities, okay? And if the theory makes the occurrence of you a zero probability event, then the theory has been refuted by the fact that you're here. Okay, and if it
Mm-hmm.
makes it a non-zero probability event, then with 100% certainty, the event will happen again. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just,
Yeah. That's interesting. So maybe another idea here, Mike, is like look at like dualism here. Like, what's wrong with someone that says maybe like a soul is something that's attached only to your body? Like once your body's gone, your soul like can't attach to anything else. So there's going to be no reincarnation. Like, what's wrong? Like, what? How do you respond to this kind of idea?
yeah, and like basically that's refuted by the fact that you're here now, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
so the theory basically says that your being incarnated and then dying prevents you from living at any future time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but if that's true, then you shouldn't be here now because there's an infinite past also. And in the
Mm-hmm.
infinite past, there would have been a time when you were incarnated. And so therefore that would prevent you from being here now, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
like, and this is the problem with any theory according to which you're dying at a particular time prevents you from living at a future time, right? Like
Yeah.
anything that's happening should have happened previously.
Because given the infinite past, like everything that could happen's already happened. So like you existing like would have already happened in the past, given like an infinite past, and then you would be here. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, right. But so you are here now, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
right, and okay, and this brings up why an infinite past is required for the argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you could say maybe my existing is a non-zero probability event, but there's only been finite time. Like if you think there's a finite past, then you could go, yeah, so it hadn't happened earlier, and so now it's
Mm-hmm.
happening for the first time, and then now maybe that prevents it from happening ever again. Okay, but given infinite past, we can't say that. So like it would have happened in the past, and so then you know your being here now proves that it can happen more than once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Um, what about like the idea, Mike, that this is very intrinsically unlikely? So I don't know if there's a lot of people like there's definitely like a lot of like major religions that would have subscribed to some form of like reincarnation. But like your view specifically, maybe not. So a lot of people might look at this and be like, "What? There's no way." Like how do you respond to like this idea, like someone that says like there's just no way this is true. This is kind of like there's a lot of things happening here. It's just intrinsically unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know if it's intrinsically unlikely, but my argument only requires a non-zero probability. If you
Yeah.
assign a non-zero initial probability to reincarnation, then that probability gets boosted up to 100%, right? And there's like, there's a Bayesian calculation here, right?
Yeah.
But the key point is probability of you being here now, if people can't be reincarnated, is zero, right? And okay, and that depends upon the infinite past. So you could think maybe I'm wrong about that. So, all right, but
Yeah.
anyway, other than that, but I don't think that people regard an infinite past as super unlikely, right?
Hmm.
Like that's a pretty common view. By the way, if you think reincarnation seems really implausible, that's probably a culturally specific view, right? You
Hmm.
probably think that because like you were taught some ideology or religion in your culture, but actually, like many people throughout history have believed in reincarnation. They didn't think it was super implausible. So, like, you really shouldn't assign like a super low probability to something that like billions of people believe.
Hmm. Okay. So again, you're pointing out like I want to just go back to the idea you talked about, like the past being infinite and like the probabilities of like reincarnation. So you're saying like if the universe is infinite here, then the probability of like you existing at this point is if you exist, you'd have to have existed at some point in the past because the past is infinite, and like that's going to give the work that's going to be like, well, then reincarnation's true. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So, like, I mean, if you could only live once in all of time, and time is infinite, what's the probability that you'd be alive specifically now at this time? The answer is 0, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, right. So like, because there's an infinite amount of other times when you could live, right? And in particular, an infinite amount of previous times when you could live, which would have prevented you from being here now. So
Yeah. Okay. The next thing I'm wondering, Mike, is like thinking about like the soul. So let's say the soul is like something that's not created, like this immaterial thing that's like always existed. Like, so when we're thinking about like idea of like what is reality, or like maybe like what's just always existed, you're gonna say like there's like these billions upon trillions, or who knows? It'd be hard to put a number on it, of these just like uncreated souls that have just like always existed in the past and they always will exist, and like that's just kind of like part of like just the structure of reality, and it's just that's what it is.
yeah, so it's this leads to what's regarded as a weird view by contemporary philosophers, right? That you exist when you're dead, and before you were born, you existed. You were just unconscious, right? Just in a unconscious state, perhaps for an extremely long time. And that also means that there's like a large number of disembodied souls right now. They're undetectable, right?
Yeah.
But so if you have a child, what you're doing is not creating a person, you're causing an unconscious soul to become conscious, right? Causing it to be embodied, right? So like before you have the kid, like he was a disembodied soul, and you're just sitting there experiencing nothing, waiting around to become embodied.
That is interesting because it makes you think about like birth and whatnot. Like with this view, it's like, well, there is this unconscious soul, and like when the process of a child coming out comes, whatever psychophysical laws are causing like the souls to be conjoined to the bodies, like they kick in, and boom, this person just comes back from like waking up from sleep, and it's kind of like that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like, I mean, just to sort of like pump your intuitions that it's possible to exist as a disembodied soul, right? I mean, so like, first thing is you might think, oh, well, maybe losing your memories makes the thing not count as you, right? Like maybe when you lose your memories and then there's another quote copy of you, it doesn't count as you because it doesn't have your memories. But so to refute that, just consider a case where you get amnesia. That's not equivalent to death, right? If you could choose between having amnesia and having death, you would choose the amnesia. Okay, by the way, there are cases in reality where people get amnesia now and they forget things about their personal identity. So like they forget who they are and they lose their episodic memories. And luckily they don't like lose language and stuff like that. So they remember general facts they've learned, but they lose facts about themselves. Okay. Anyway, and then usually they regain their memories after like a few days or something. So, okay. And so once they've regained their memories, then it's definitely the same person. But also that shows that before they regained the memories, it was also the same person. Right? So, so like say, A is the person, the original person before they have an accident, and then B is right after an accident where they have amnesia, and then C is after they regain their memories. Okay. So B is the same person as C, right? It's like a person after regaining the memories is the same as the person right after the accident. Okay. And C is the same person as A, which everyone agrees with. So therefore, B is the same person as A. Right. So that shows that the person in the state after they've lost their memories before they regain the memories is the same as the original person. Okay. So it is possible to exist while not having your memories.
Yeah. To me, that makes sense. The thing that's weird to me is thinking about like the psychophysical laws that could bring it about. Where like with that soul that's kind of just there, it's like reconjoined with the body every time, and like it's a mystery. And like that I think it's fine to have mysteries in your worldview, but I'm like that's just interesting. Like, how does that? Like, who knows? And I guess you'd be like that. You would have discovered the nature of consciousness, like you set out to do, if you had the answer to that. So.
That's right. Yeah. I would like to know, like I would like to know because like maybe I could do something to cause myself to be embodied, more quickly. Right. By the way, I don't know how long it takes, to be reincarnated after your death. I don't know if it's instantaneous or if it takes like a Googleplex years, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have to wait for, like a repetition of something close to the exact state that you were in at the time that you were most recently conceived, that could take like a ridiculously long time, right? It could take like 10 to the 100 years or something.
Okay, that's helpful. So something else I'm wondering on, Mike, and I think I kind of have your answer based off of what we talked about, but I wrote this down, is like, so right now the universe is kind of expanding like outwards almost. What if the universe just like kept expanding outwards like infinitely into the future? Like it just kept going outwards, never got closer together. And it seems like if that's the case, then like there's not going to be a state where like our physical existence comes into being again, and then like we're in trouble. Like I'm guessing you're going to respond, well, if there's like an infinite past, you can kind of like get around this, but I'm just curious your thoughts here.
Yeah. So that's right. Like if the universe just expands outward forever, then there will be no recurrence, and so then like eventually there will be no life forever. Okay, but I mean, my argument would be, yeah, but that just is not the case, right? And the way that I know that that's not the case is that, well, there's an infinite past, and so if it was always expanding outward, it would be larger than it currently is.
Yeah.
Given an infinite amount of time, it would be infinitely large, and it's not. It's large, but it's not infinitely large, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's to say, whatever, the observable universe. Okay, so I'm not saying that there's not other stuff out beyond the observable universe. Maybe there are other universes that are far away, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, this universe would already be infinitely large if it always expanded outward.
Does your view, Mike, like, does it depend on any specific view of like what time is? Or like, are you good? Like A theory, B theory, doesn't matter. Like time, like whatever, we can roll with whatever and have my view be true.
I mean, it just requires a view in which it's infinite in both the past and the future. I think, are there any views in metaphysics of time that would reject this argument? I don't know, other than like there's a beginning of time. I mean, like maybe presentists would say, no, time is finite if in fact there's only one point of it. Okay. All right. But, that would only create a problem for my argument if it entails totally absurd conclusions, right? That would refute the theory, right? Because like if the theory implies that there's not an infinite past, whatever, like whatever your view of time is, if it prevents there from being an infinite past, like does it prevent there from being like a 5 minutes ago? Because like if there couldn't have been something before the Big Bang, then why could there be something before now? Like, right? If your claim is, oh, only the present exists, then okay, that means there wasn't even 5 minutes ago. And then I just think that, and then does that mean that we haven't actually been talking?
Yeah.
You thought we were talking for an hour, but actually we have not been talking for any time. Right? And then I think that's just absurd, right? So anyway, like, the views that would undermine my argument would also be absurd views.
That's helpful. So I wonder, like, here's an interesting question. Like, obviously, like we think evil is a big problem. Like evil is something we want to minimize, right? And like we don't want to just like let terrible things happen. Like, given an infinite like future, doesn't that mean that like every possible horrendous act of evil is going to happen? Like, given an infinite like future, like we kind of look at the like evil and it's like, well, I guess everything that is possibly horrific that could be happen is just going to happen.
Yeah. Well, so every non-zero probability event happens, which includes every bad event that has non-zero probability and every good event that has non-zero probability. So, look at the bright side, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now, but the thing is, like, so you might have this ethical problem. You might think, oh, so like the total value, if you're like a utilitarian or whatever consequentialist, you might think, so the total value of the universe is infinite. It's either plus infinity or minus infinity, right? It's it's not likely to be a finite number. And so if what you're supposed to do ethically is like maximize the value of the universe, then there's nothing for you to do. It's like whatever you
Yeah.
do is not going to change it from infinity
Yeah.
to anything else, right? So
Hmm.
then there's no reason to do anything or not do anything. Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, and this, this might be like a refutation of that view. Like maybe you should just give up that ethical theory, or you should modify the theory, right? Like what
Hmm.
what a consequentialist would say is probably, well, what you should do is maximize the value of the consequences of your own actions, and
Yeah.
and maybe I should add your own actions in this lifetime, right?
Hmm.
And and that's finite, and it can get larger or smaller. So do that. Like try not to actually do any evil yourself. Try to do good things.
Hmm. Okay. So you're trying to think then why on earth think that there should be like moral action if like your actions ultimately don't like change the infinite course of events because events just keep happening infinitely and it's like focusing on like what you can do in like this present moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, suppose there's an infinite number of people, and whatever, all of them, they're all at a welfare level 1. Okay, and so the
Hmm.
total is infinity. Okay, but anyway, you meet this one particular person, and like, you could give him a cookie, which would raise his welfare level from 1 to 2. Should you do it? Yes. What do you mean? Like, we benefit that
Yeah.
person, right? And stipulate that there are no negative consequences, whatever. All that happens is that guy goes up to 2 and everyone else is still at 1. So the total is
Hmm.
still infinity. So you didn't increase the total. Yes, but you did benefit a person. And like that's enough of a reason to do it, right?
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful, Mike. So here's something else like a little different, but like do dogs have souls?
Yes. So I mean, any being that has consciousness has an immaterial component that's the thing that has the conscious states, right?
Hmm.
Okay, and by the way, I'm not saying that dogs are self-aware. I don't know. I don't really know what's in the mind of a dog, but I assume that they have a mind. Like I assume that they
Hmm.
have some kind of beliefs. They have some kind of desires, right? Like the dog
Hmm.
gets excited when it's time to go for a walk, so it has experiences, right?
Hmm.
And so, like, if you have an immaterial component, which is the thing that has those experiences, then the dog has one of those too.
Okay, that's helpful. Um, That's it's been a lot of fun, Mike, and there's a lot of different things that we've talked about here. Do you have anything else you want to talk about with regards to like souls and reincarnation or anything like that? Because I feel like we got a good grounding of like everything happening here.
No, no, that's good.
Okay, well, sounds good, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you and your time. There's a lot of like fun, interesting things to chew about here. Maybe we'll just keep on chewing on them. So thanks for coming on. How can people like follow with you, connect with you, things like that?
Oh yeah, I have a blog called Fake News on Substack. So spelled FAKENOUS .substack.net, or is it com or net? Anyway, okay. Anyway, look up my blog, and
Hmm.
also my website, and my Amazon authors page and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a link down below where people can follow Mike in his blog, and whatnot. Because I know you do so much stuff, and it's like you do this philosophy of mind stuff, but you've done a lot of like philosophy of like politics, and like I was looking you up, and like you're in Wikipedia as like libertarianism. It's like you're one of the people. Like if you're like libertarianism, it's like oh, Mike Huemer, he's there. He's one of the guys. Um,
That's
so
right. Yeah, I've written about a lot
thank
of
you so
things. Everybody should go and buy all of my books.
spend like gazillions of dollars because of academic book pricing. So there you go.
Yeah, spend a gazillion dollars,
I
and
mean, if the future is infinite, then you really do actually own a gazillion dollars. It's just not all at the moment because you
yeah,
possess
yeah.
all the money
And
possible.
to be clear, I'm urging you to spend money in this lifetime.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Mike. I really appreciate you and your time. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a good one. This is here in Apologetics. If you're new, subscribe, leave a like, all that fun stuff, and we'll catch you next time. God bless.